In June of 2020, nearly 13 years after a 3-year-old girl vanished from a holiday apartment on the Portuguese coast, German prosecutors stood in front of cameras and said something the world had been waiting more than a decade to hear. They had a suspect. Not a person of interest, not a name whispered in tabloids. A man they described as their prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, a German national named Christian Brueckner, already sitting in a German prison for an unrelated crime, already known to have been living less than 2 miles from the apartment where Madeleine slept on the night she disappeared. Investigators went further. They said they believed Madeleine was dead and that they had evidence to support it. It felt, for a moment, like the answer the world had been chasing since 2007. It was not an arrest. It was not a charge. And more than 5 years later, it still is not one. As of today, no one has ever been formally charged in connection with Madeleine McCann's disappearance. Brueckner has denied any involvement. He has, at various points, been acquitted of unrelated crimes, released from prison, and reinvestigated, all while the central question, what happened to Madeleine, remains exactly where it was in May 2007. This is, by most measures, one of the most heavily investigated missing persons cases in modern history. 3 national police forces, Portuguese, British, and German, have poured resources into it across nearly 2 decades. Investigators have logged hundreds of people of interest, thousands of public tips, and multiple physical searches spanning 2 countries. And still, at the center of all of it, there is a 3-year-old girl who has never been found, and a family that has spent 19 years waiting for an answer. To understand how a case with a named suspect can still be, technically and legally, wide open, you have to go back to the beginning. To a quiet resort town on the Algarve coast, and a family that never came home the way they left. Before we go further, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Portugal's Algarve coast pulled in visitors from across Europe and beyond that spring, and somewhere out there, someone may still be holding a piece of this puzzle without realizing it. Madeleine Beth McCann was born on May 12, 2003, in Leicester, England, the first child of Kate and Gerry McCann, both physicians from the town of Rothley in Leicestershire. She had 2 younger siblings, twins named Sean and Amelie, born in 2005. Those who photographed her at the time described a distinctive detail that would later become one of the most reproduced identifying features in modern missing persons history. A small brown fleck in the green of her right eye set against a left eye of blue and green. She stood about 90 centimeters tall, with blonde hair and a small brown birthmark on her left leg. In late April 2007, days before her 4th birthday, the McCann family traveled to Praia da Luz, a resort town in Portugal's Algarve region, for a week-long holiday with a group of family friends. 7 adults who would later become known in the press simply as the Tapas Group, after the restaurant where they gathered most evenings. The families were staying at the Ocean Club Resort in ground-floor apartments close to the restaurant and pool. There is comparatively little documented about who Madeleine was as a person, beyond what her family and family friends have shared publicly in the years since. She was, by all accounts, an ordinary 3-year-old on a family holiday, days from turning 4. It is a smaller portrait than most true crime cases allow for, and that is itself part of what makes this case different. Most of what the public knows about Madeleine McCann is the story of her absence, not her life. Now that you know a little about who Madeleine was, a 3-year-old on a family holiday, days from her 4th birthday, does she remind you of anyone in your own life? Tell me in the comments. Keeping her memory human is part of what keeps a case like this alive. On the evening of May 3, 2007, Kate and Gerry McCann joined their friends for dinner at the resort's tapas restaurant. A short walk. By most accounts, somewhere in the range of 50 to 60 meters, from the ground-floor apartment where Madeleine and her younger siblings, Sean and Amelie, were sleeping. The parents in the group had arranged an informal system of checking on their children throughout the evening, taking turns walking back to the apartments roughly every half hour. Jerry McCann checked on the children earlier in the evening and reported nothing out of the ordinary. Sometime later, accounts of the exact minute vary slightly, generally placing it between roughly 9:50 and 10 p.m. Kate McCann returned to the apartment and found Madeleine gone. Her siblings were still asleep in their beds, undisturbed. A window in the bedroom was open, and a shutter appeared to have been tampered with. What followed was a frantic, informal search by the parents and their friends before Portuguese police were called. In the earliest hours, investigators and search parties operated on the assumption that a young child might simply have wandered off on her own, and by several accounts, the initial response did not treat the situation with the urgency that a suspected abduction would have demanded. Descriptions were not immediately circulated, and the nearby Spanish border, less than 2 hours away by car, was not immediately placed on alert for a missing child. Officers on the scene later acknowledged that vital forensic clues may have been compromised in those first hours, since the apartment was not sealed off as a formal crime scene right away. By the next morning, Portuguese police had formally opened an investigation, and within days, the disappearance of a young British girl from a Portuguese holiday resort had become an international story. On May 26th, police released a description of a man reportedly seen that night carrying a child, or an object that could have been mistaken for a child, though the description was vague. Public appeals followed quickly, and from unlikely places. Footballer David Beckham recorded a televised appeal. Author J.K. Rowling contributed financially to the search effort, and Kate and Jerry McCann were received in a private audience with Pope Benedict XVI, who blessed a photograph of their daughter. On August 11th, exactly 100 days after Madeleine disappeared, investigators publicly acknowledged for the first time that she might be dead, a grim marker that the case had shifted from an active search for a missing child toward something else. The investigation that followed would consume years, cross international borders, and, before it settled on the suspect it has today, pass through several other names first. Portuguese police pursued hundreds of leads in the disappearance's earliest weeks. By some accounts, more than 350 reported sightings and suspicious incidents were logged within the first week alone. An e-fit sketch of a man reportedly seen carrying a child toward the beach on the night Madeleine disappeared was released to the public, though descriptions of its usefulness varied, with some coverage noting it showed little more than the back of a man's head. On May 14, 2007, less than 2 weeks after Madeleine vanished, police named their first formal suspect, or arguido, under Portuguese law, Robert Murat, a British expatriate who had lived in the Praia da Luz area for years and had assisted as an informal translator for journalists and police in the case's early days. Murat lived at a property known locally as Casa Liliana, situated roughly 150 yards from the McCann's apartment, a proximity that fueled early media speculation about him. Murat was questioned extensively and maintained that his conscience was clear. He was never charged, was later formally cleared, and went on to win substantial libel damages from several media organizations that had reported on him. He remains, to this day, someone investigators have periodically reapproached in a witness capacity rather than as a suspect, including as recently as Operation Grange's 2013 review, when he was among 11 individuals British detectives requested to formally interview. The investigation's focus then turned toward Madeleine's own parents. In late July 2007, with the case growing cold, British police flew out 2 specially trained sniffer dogs to assist Portuguese investigators. A Springer Spaniel named Eddie, trained to detect the scent of human cadavers, and a second dog, Keela, trained specifically to detect trace amounts of human blood. Handled by South Yorkshire Police dog handler Martin Grime, the pair worked through the McCann's ground floor apartment, identified in police records as Apartment 5A. According to accounts of the search, Eddie alerted near a wardrobe in Kate and Jerry McCann's bedroom, behind a sofa in the living room, and on a stuffed toy called Cuddle Cat that Kate had been carrying with her since Madeleine's disappearance. Keela alerted to the same area behind the sofa and, separately, to some of Kate McCann's clothing. Both dogs were then brought to a rental car the family had hired more than 3 weeks after Madeleine vanished, and both indicated a reaction consistent with their training. Forensic testing on material recovered from the vehicle, conducted at a laboratory in the United Kingdom, was later described by Portugal's national police chief at the time as inconclusive. The DNA evidence could not be definitively attributed, though it was enough to shift the direction of the investigation. On September 7, 2007, Kate and Jerry McCann were formally declared arguidos, formal suspects under Portuguese law, a status that permitted police to question them under caution but did not amount to a charge. The couple strongly denied any involvement in their daughter's disappearance and continued to publicly campaign for information about her whereabouts, even while under formal suspicion. It's worth noting that the dog alert evidence has remained a point of significant public dispute in the years since. Supporters of the McCanns have pointed to alternative, non-forensic explanations for the dog's reactions, while others have argued the alerts were meaningful given the animal's training record. Investigators had cadaver dog alerts and inconclusive forensic testing, but no charge and no body, and the trail went cold from there. What do you think happened in that apartment? Drop your theory in the comments. Throughout this period, the McCanns found themselves navigating an unusual dual role: grieving, campaigning parents on one hand, and formal suspects in a criminal investigation on the other. A tension that shaped years of press coverage and public opinion around the case, much of it sharply divided. The lead Portuguese investigator on the case, Gonçalo Amaral, was removed from his post in October 2007 amid controversy, including public comments critical of the British police's involvement in the investigation, and was formally taken off the case the following year, with Portuguese authorities citing a series of procedural missteps in how the original crime scene and investigation had been handled. In July 2008, Portuguese prosecutors formally shelved, or archived, the investigation altogether, citing a lack of sufficient evidence to charge anyone, including the McCanns, whose arguido status was lifted. No one has ever been charged by Portuguese authorities in connection with Madeleine's disappearance. The case's formal closure in Portugal did not end public scrutiny of the family, however, nor did it end the search. The McCann family had booked their week at the Ocean Club through the British holiday operator Mark Warner, a company that catered specifically to families traveling with young children, and their group of friends had made the same trip together in previous years. In the weeks and months after Madeleine disappeared, reported sightings poured in from around the world. Portuguese police and, later, British investigators would go on to log thousands of them over the following years, reportedly totaling somewhere in the range of 8,000 to 9,000 individual reports from more than 100 countries by some tallies. Several of the earliest and most closely examined came from Morocco. Within days of the disappearance, a Norwegian woman living in southern Spain reported seeing a girl matching Madeleine's description at a petrol station in Marrakech. And in late August 2007, a Spanish tourist photographed a woman carrying a blonde child on her back near the same region, an image widely circulated at the time before investigators determined the child was a local farmer's daughter. Kate and Jerry McCann personally traveled to Morocco that June to appeal directly to the public and meet with the country's interior minister. None of the thousands of reported sightings recorded since 2007 across dozens of countries has ever been confirmed. The family also engaged a private security firm, National Risk Group, specifically to track and follow up on the flood of sighting reports the case continued to generate. For years afterward, the case existed in a strange limbo, technically closed in Portugal, but never resolved, and never abandoned by Madeleine's parents. Kate and Jerry McCann established what became known as the Find Madeleine campaign and, using both public donations and their own resources, funded a series of private investigators to continue searching where official channels had stopped. In 2011, Kate McCann published a memoir titled simply Madeleine, detailing the family's experience of the disappearance and its aftermath. The family's search efforts and public advocacy continued for years, even as the case slipped in and out of headlines. For years, Madeleine's family waded through official silence, closed investigations, and false leads, without ever getting a definitive answer. If you've ever waited for a resolution that didn't come, a diagnosis, a court case, an apology, I want to hear about it in the comments. That kind of patience deserves to be acknowledged. In 2008, Gonzalo Amaral, the former lead investigator removed from the case, published a book titled The Truth of the Lie, in which he advanced the theory that Madeleine had died accidentally in the apartment and that her parents had staged an abduction to conceal her death. The McCanns strongly denied the allegations and pursued a lengthy libel case against Amaral in Portuguese courts. That legal battle stretched on for years. A Portuguese court ruled in the McCanns' favor in 2015, ordering damages, only for Portugal's Supreme Court to overturn that ruling 2 years later. The McCanns ultimately appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, which ruled in 2020 that Portugal had not failed in its duty to give the couple a fair hearing, effectively ending their legal recourse against Amaral's claims. Amaral would go on to remain a vocal, if controversial, presence around the case for years afterward, continuing to publicly defend his original theory even as the investigation moved in a different direction entirely. Public fascination with the case, meanwhile, never meaningfully faded. In 2019, Netflix released an 8-part documentary series, The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann, which examined the investigation in detail and interviewed a range of people connected to the case, reigniting public debate over competing theories about what had happened that night, debate that has, at various points, split public opinion sharply between those who believe Madeleine was abducted by a stranger and those who have entertained Amaral's alternative theory, despite the McCanns' consistent denial and the absence of any evidence that has ever resulted in charges against them. Meanwhile, official interest in the case was reignited from an unexpected direction. In May 2011, at the request of the British Home Secretary, London's Metropolitan Police agreed to review the original Portuguese investigation, a review that was upgraded to a full independent inquiry, codenamed Operation Grange, in July 2013. As part of that review, British detectives compiled a new, more detailed reconstruction of the events of May 3, 2007, releasing it publicly in October 2013 alongside several e-fit images of men police wanted to identify and appealing directly to anyone who had been in the Algarve at the time to come forward, including through a review of historic mobile phone data. That October, detectives also requested to formally interview 11 people considered relevant to the case, including Robert Murat, who by then was expected to be approached only as a witness rather than a suspect. British detectives conducted physical searches near the original resort in June 2014, cordoning off roughly 15 acres of scrubland and using ground-penetrating radar, spades, and cadaver dogs supplied by South Wales Police. Officers also examined 2 further sites in Praia da Luz that same year. None of those 2014 searches turned up evidence connected to the case. For nearly a decade after Madeleine's disappearance, then, the investigation moved sideways more than it moved forward. Cleared suspects, shelved files, and searches that found nothing. That changed, decisively, in the summer of 2020. We're about to reach the moment this case broke wide open again after more than a decade of silence. Before you keep watching, what do you think finally cracked it open? Drop your guess in the comments. On June 3, 2020, German authorities publicly identified a new suspect in Madeleine's disappearance, Christian Brueckner, a German national in his early 40s who was, at the time, already serving a prison sentence in Germany for an unrelated crime. The announcement came alongside a coordinated public appeal. Scotland Yard reiterated a £20,000 reward for information leading to a conviction. German federal police broadcast their own appeal that same evening on German television, and investigators asked the public whether they recognized a set of phone numbers linked to the inquiry. German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters told reporters that investigators had concrete evidence that Madeleine was dead, though her body has never been found, and no charge specific to her disappearance has ever followed that statement. A spokesperson for Madeleine's parents described the identification of the German suspect at the time as the most significant development in the 13 years since her disappearance. Brueckner has consistently denied any involvement. What investigators laid out was largely circumstantial, but layered. Brueckner had lived intermittently in the Algarve region for years, including stretches in Praia da Luz itself, at times living out of a Volkswagen camper van. Phone records reviewed by investigators reportedly placed a call to Brueckner's mobile phone that began around 7:30 p.m. and ended around 8 p.m. on the night of May 3, 2007, hours before Madeleine is believed to have disappeared, sometime between roughly 9:10 and 10 p.m. But the records were used to argue that Brueckner was in the immediate area that evening. He was already known to Portuguese police at the time of the disappearance for an unrelated matter. He had served jail time earlier in 2007 for siphoning diesel fuel from parked trucks near the nearby town of Portimão, and by some later accounts, officers had gone to his door in the days following Madeleine's disappearance as part of a broader canvass of local residents, but found him not home, and there is no clear public record of a documented follow-up at the time. Gonçalo Amaral, the original lead investigator, later expressed public skepticism about the case against Brueckner, questioning why no fingerprints or biological trace matching him were found at the point of entry into the children's bedroom. Brueckner's own criminal record, once it became public, added weight to the German investigators' interest in him, even as it complicated the presentation of any future case. He had been convicted of the 2005 rape of a 72-year-old American tourist in Praia da Luz, a conviction upheld on appeal by a German federal court in 2020, and was separately convicted of drug trafficking. Reporting on his background also surfaced that Brueckner had disclosed historic child sex convictions from Germany dating back to his teenage years, disclosures made, according to some accounts, during unrelated court proceedings in Portugal years earlier. None of this establishes his guilt in Madeleine's disappearance specifically, but it is part of why German prosecutors have described him as their focus, and part of why the case against him has drawn both intense scrutiny and intense skepticism in roughly equal measure. Much of the case German prosecutors built against Brueckner over the following years rested on the testimony of Helga Busching, a former associate of Brueckner's. Busching has stated publicly, including in testimony given during separate German court proceedings, that in 2008, roughly a year after Madeleine disappeared, he encountered Brueckner at a music festival in Spain and raised the disappearance in conversation. According to Busching's account, Brueckner responded that the girl was not screaming, a remark Busching says chilled him enough that he did not press further, and that Brueckner left the festival abruptly that night. Busching says he attempted to report the exchange to British police later that year via a voicemail, but that the tip was not meaningfully followed up until 2017, when he came forward again through a dedicated hotline and was interviewed at length. Busching has separately testified that he once found a stash of videos in Brueckner's home appearing to show him sexually assaulting 2 women, evidence that was later used in a 2019 trial that resulted in Brueckner's conviction for the 2005 rape of a 72-year-old American tourist in Praia da Luz, the same resort town where Madeleine disappeared 2 years later. It's worth noting that Busching's credibility as a witness has been publicly challenged by Brueckner's defense team, and a German judge would later describe some of his testimony as unreliable in a separate proceeding. In 2016, investigators reportedly recovered a hard drive from a disused factory Brueckner had purchased, which some reporting has described as containing material investigators believe is relevant to the case, though the specific evidentiary value of that material has not been independently confirmed in public reporting. Investigators also pursued leads in Germany itself. In June 2020, around the same time Brueckner was first publicly named, German police carried out a search of an allotment garden plot in Hanover connected to a property where Brueckner was known to have spent time. That search reportedly turned up no significant results at the time. It would not be the only German search connected to the case. In 2020, officers also excavated a sealed cellar discovered beneath a garden shed on a separate Hanover property linked to Brueckner, removing bagged forensic material along with ordinary items, including a child's toy bucket, for examination. In October 2022, German prosecutors formally charged Brueckner, not in connection with Madeleine's disappearance, but with 3 counts of rape and 2 counts of child sexual abuse, allegedly committed in Portugal between 2000 and 2017. That same year, Portuguese prosecutors separately granted Brueckner arguido status specifically within the Madeleine McCann case file, formally naming him a suspect under Portuguese law without filing charges. In May 2023, acting on new information from German investigators, Portuguese police conducted a fresh search at the Arade Dam Reservoir, roughly 50 kilometers from Praia da Luz, an area Brueckner was known to have frequented between 1995 and 2007, reportedly referring to it as his Little Paradise. Over 3 days, between 20 and 30 officers used heavy machinery, sniffer dogs, rakes, and hand tools to search the reservoir's banks, while divers examined the water itself. Investigators removed several bags of material for laboratory analysis. German prosecutor Christian Brueckner thanked the Portuguese, British, and German teams for what he called outstanding cooperation, but no announced breakthrough followed. It was, notably, not the first search of that same reservoir. Portuguese media reported that police had also combed the site back in 2008, when divers recovered only animal remains. Brueckner's trial on the 2022 charges began in Braunschweig, Germany, in February 2024, though the opening hearing was almost immediately postponed after his defense raised procedural concerns about one of the lay judges. When proceedings eventually got underway, Helge Busching again testified at length, describing 2 videos he said he discovered in a camera he claimed to have taken from Brueckner's home. According to Busching's courtroom testimony, one recording appeared to show a woman in her 70s being assaulted, and the other a girl he estimated to be around 14 or 15 years old. In both, he said, he recognized Brueckner's voice and, in one recording, saw him remove a mask at the end of the attack. Busching testified that he had been in a witness protection program for 4 years by that point because of his cooperation in the case, and he denied under cross-examination that he had been paid by Scotland Yard for his information. But on October 8, 2024, the court acquitted Brueckner on all counts. Presiding Judge Uta Engemann ruled that the evidence was insufficient to convict, stating that Brueckner could not be convicted of the acts he is accused of, and noting that pre-trial media coverage appeared to have shaped public perception and, in her assessment, influenced the reliability of some witnesses. Brueckner's defense attorney argued that his client had been targeted largely because of his public association with the McCann case rather than on the strength of the evidence itself. Because Brueckner was still serving his earlier sentence for the 2005 rape conviction, the acquittal did not result in his immediate release. He remained in custody until September 2025, when he was released from Sanday Prison near Hanover after completing that sentence, fitted with an ankle monitor as a condition of release. The lead German prosecutor on the case, Hans Christian Wolters, told the BBC around the time of the release that he continued to believe Brueckner was dangerous, but that current German law required his release absent a new charge. The case did not end there. In February 2026, Germany's Federal Prosecutor General submitted a report to the country's highest criminal appeals court challenging the October 2024 acquittal, arguing, according to Portuguese press coverage of the filing, that the trial judge's handling of the case had been seriously flawed, and requesting that the acquittal be overturned to allow for a new trial. That challenge followed a lengthy appeal filed by prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters in late 2024. Hazel Behan, the woman whose 2004 rape in the Algarve was linked to Brueckner in earlier reporting, has indicated through people close to her that she would be willing to testify again if a retrial is ordered. Separately, in May 2026, a member of the UK Parliament, representing the McCann family's home constituency, publicly called for German authorities to support extraditing Brueckner to the United Kingdom if evidence is judged sufficient to bring him to trial there, while Britain's Home Office confirmed continued funding for Operation Grange's work into 2026 and 2027. And in July 2026, Portuguese press reported that Scotland Yard had received a new dossier from German authorities, described by police sources as containing material considered significant to the investigation, including photographs and further witness accounts related to Brueckner, though what, specifically, that material contains has not been made public. Investigators have also continued to search physical sites in Portugal in the years since the reservoir operation. In June 2025, German and Portuguese teams searched near an abandoned rural building several miles from Praia da Luz, using pickaxes, chainsaws, and shovels to clear dense vegetation and pumping water from a well on the property, in what was described as a fresh line of inquiry roughly 18 years after Madeleine's disappearance. Separately, and with considerably less certainty attached, Madeleine's case resurfaced in an unrelated context in early 2026, when portions of documents connected to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation were released in the United States. According to reporting on those files, an unnamed protected witness claimed to have seen, in 2009, a woman resembled Madeleine Maxwell, accompanied by a child who resembled Madeleine. That claim has not been independently verified, has not been substantiated by any of the three police forces actively investigating Madeleine's disappearance, and should be treated with significant caution. Uncorroborated citing claims have surfaced periodically throughout this case for nearly 2 decades, and the vast majority have led nowhere. None of what's described above, the arguido status, the acquitted trial, the pending appeal, the new dossier, amounts to a charge in Madeleine's case. Christian Brueckner has never been charged with any offense connected to her disappearance, and under the law of every country involved, he is entitled to the presumption of innocence unless and until that changes. As 2026 began, Kate and Gerry McCann marked another new year the way they have marked nearly every one since 2007. With a public message thanking supporters and insisting the case remains active. In a statement posted to the official Find Madeleine campaign page at the end of 2025, the couple wrote that the investigation continues and that their search for knowledge and justice was, in their words, far from over. They also announced a new partnership with the charity Missing People, supporting a confidential helpline for young people at risk of exploitation, a small extension of their advocacy beyond their own daughter's case, built from nearly 2 decades spent navigating a system meant to protect children. Madeleine Beth McCann turned 23 in May 2026, an age marked, as everyone before it has been, without her. Now in their late 50s, Kate and Gerry McCann have spent more of their daughter's life searching for her than they spent raising her. Sean and Amelie, the toddlers who slept undisturbed in the beds beside their sister's empty one that night in May 2007, are now young adults who have grown up almost entirely inside the shadow of a story that never resolved. The Ocean Club apartment complex still stands in Praia da Luz. Operation Grange, still funded and still active, continues its work out of London. And the file on Madeleine McCann, opened on May 4, 2007, has never been closed. 19 years after Madeleine McCann disappeared from a ground-floor apartment on a warm May evening in Portugal, the case remains what it has always technically been: unsolved. A suspect has been named. He has never been charged. And somewhere, the answer to what happened in that apartment is still out there, waiting for the right piece of information to reach the right investigator. If you have information about this case, contact the Metropolitan Police's Operation Grange at operation.grange@met.police.uk. Every case deserves an answer. Every family deserves the truth.